Okay, guys, so as you've seen, Boston is suffering, but the colonies agree to come and work together to help Boston, which is a great thing. So, what happens is 12 out of the 13 colonies send representatives from their legislatures to have a meeting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a building called Carpenter's Hall. Now, a fancy schmancy word for a meeting where people get together to make decisions is called a Congress. So, this meeting was called the First Continental Congress, and 12 out of the 13 colonies showed up to this meeting. Georgia did not show up for whatever reason. Maybe it was too far. Maybe they were afraid of committing treason, whatever it is. For a total of 56 men were in this meeting. Now, this isn't a one-day meeting. This is many, many days, because you can imagine a bunch of men all in a room trying to come up with a decision with all many different opinions. Just think about at home when you're deciding where you want to go out for dinner with 4 or 5 people in your family. It's hard to make a decision. We have 56 strong opinion men in this meeting, and it takes them a while to come up with some decisions. But in the end, they compromise, they negotiate, and here's what they decide. Most of the colonies want things to end peacefully. So they decide to, with the goal of getting the king to get rid of those intolerable acts that are affecting Boston, they just want to go back to a nice, peaceful relationship with England. So not everyone's on that same page, but that's what they agreed to. First off, they decide to write a petition to the king, basically saying, please repeal the intolerable acts. All the colonies agree, get rid of the big queen's giggle. They also decide to kind of show the king that they're serious by boycotting. They decide as a set of colonies to stop buying taxed goods. When the king loses enough of his money, hopefully he'll wake up and realize that the colonies are important enough to listen to. But not everybody is feeling the same way. The colonists from, shocking, Massachusetts, the Boston area, they're angry. They don't want to go peaceful. They want to fight. And since that's not what the Congress agreed to do, they decided to kind of take matters into their own hands. Men in Massachusetts militias, those volunteer armies, decided to become what are referred to as Minutemen. These are men that are ready to fight in a minute's notice. Now, we know that in the past, our militias only trained once a year. So clearly they're not very well organized, well trained, but they decide to change that because they want to be ready to fight. These men in Massachusetts, especially in Boston, they're angry and want to fight. So I want you to keep that in mind, that at this point, the colonists in Massachusetts are now ready to fight at a minute's notice. That's going to play a huge role in our next story here, and that is going to come from our governor, General Thomas Gage. He is the new governor of Massachusetts, and he wants nothing more than to prove that he is the right man for the job to his boss, KG3. And so he finds a perfect opportunity to do that. He hears a rumor. And it's a two-part rumor. The first thing that he hears is in a town called Concord, which is not far from Boston. He hears that the colonists have been hiding weapons and ammunition, things that have been left behind from the French and Indian War. And he knows that as the colonists in Massachusetts are getting angrier, he wants to get these weapons and ammunitions out of their hands because they might choose to use them against the British soldiers. The other part of the rumor that he hears is that also in a nearby town from Boston called Lexington, he hears that 2 men, Sam Adams and John Hancock, 2 of the leaders of the Sons of Liberty, 2 of the men that he believes are responsible for the Boston Tea Party, are hiding. And so he decides with this information, he needs to come up with a plan. And so here is his plan. He is here in Boston with the British soldiers. And the first step is the soldiers are going to leave Boston and they are going to take some rowboats across the Charleston River, and they are going to travel on foot, not too far, maybe I think 20 miles or so to Lexington, where they are going to surprise Sam Adams and John Hancock and arrest them and set an example of them to the rest of the people who are willing to break the law. From there, the soldiers are going to then march to Concord, where they are going to collect the weapons and ammunition that the colonists have been hiding. That's the plan. Now, all of this has to happen really super duper top secret, because if news reaches Sam Adams and John Hancock that they're going to be arrested, they're going to leave, they're going to hide. And if news reaches Concord that they're coming for the weapons and ammunition, they'll just hide the weapons and ammunition or move them somewhere else. So all of this has to be top secret. And that's really hard for General Gage, because in Boston, there are spies everywhere. In fact, he chooses not to tell a single person, not even the person he's putting in charge of this mission. The only person he tells is his wife. Now, the news ends up leaking and reaching other colonists. Some say the wife was the one that spilled the beans, but we'll never know. And that is how the next story occurs. And that is the story of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Pretty well-known story. Paul Revere, you can see him right there. You've heard of him before. He is the one who made this image at the request of Sam Adams of the Boston Massacre. But he's most well known for the story of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And the reason it's so well known is that a poet a while ago named Longfellow wrote a poem called The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere about this moment in history. Now, what's interesting is Paul Revere did not participate in this event alone. He was with a gentleman named William Dawes. However, the poet never included William Dawes's name, so really Paul Revere is the more famous of the two. But Paul Revere and William Dawes are going to be off to warn Sam Adams and John Hancock in Lexington that the British are coming to get them, and then move on to Concord to tell them to hide or move the weapons and ammunition. It is, again, there's spies everywhere in Boston. And so communicating without people knowing what's happening is hard. So they came up with a lot of codes. One of the most famous codes is also made famous from this poem. And the code is 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. What that means is there was a church in Boston called the Old North Church. Now it's still there today. And basically what this message was that if the soldiers were leaving Boston by land, then they would put one lantern up in the top of the church. If they were going by sea, leaving Boston by sea, they would put up 2 lanterns. So what that means is there's only one way to leave Boston by land. And it would be, if you kind of follow my arrow here, it'd be leaving Boston out of what is called Boston Neck. It's a really narrow piece of land there. Or you can go by sea by crossing the Charleston River. The rumor that spread throughout Boston was that General Gage was going to send his troops across the Charleston River. So when Paul Revere set sail for Lexington, said he didn't set sail. When he set off for Lexington, he first sent a message to people that they were going to be going by sea. So he's going to put up 2 lanterns, and then he's going to set off for Lexington to warn them that the British are coming. The other famous thing from this story of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere is the phrase, the British are coming, the British are coming. Now, you won't hear that in today's episode because it's most likely not what was really said. They're all British. So if they're really yelling, the British are coming, that would be like them yelling, we're coming, which doesn't really make sense. More likely what was yelled was, the regulars are coming, because the British Army was often called the Regular Army. Now, what's the plan for Paul Revere and William Dawes is they are going to leave Boston. I'm going to stick the pointer on here. They are going to leave Boston, but they're going to split up because if one of them is caught, if they're together and they're caught, no one reaches Lexington and Concord. So they split up. Paul Revere is going to go across the Charleston River, and he's going to sneak across there really stealthily. And William Dawes is going to go out of Boston Neck. And the goal is that they are both going to make it to Lexington, warn Sam Adams and John Hancock that the British are coming so they could escape, and then move on to Concord. Unfortunately, or I should start with fortunately, both of them reach Lexington, and they will warn Sam Adams and John Hancock in time. On their way to Concord, however, neither of them will make it. Paul Revere gets captured by the British. William Dawes falls off his horse and can't make it. Lucky for them, on the way to Concord, before all that happened, they had run into a third guy named Samuel Prescott who agreed to help them. And he will successfully make it to Concord and will warn everyone along the way and the people of Concord that the British are on the way. And so that is the story of the Midnight Ride that you will see.